afternoon, happy Thursday, happy Black History Month. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us live on Facebook or on the internet after the fact. We very much appreciate that. My name is Josiah Gilliam, and I am honored to serve as the My Brother's Keeper Coordinator in Mayor Peduto's Office of Equity. And we've done a number of broadcasts over the past year that have explored various intersections and work happening in the city, in different departments, in different communities, at different levels. And I'm really excited about the conversation we have to have today with some of the leaders in the region that I look up to and that a lot of folks know and respect. And in talking with Deputy Chief Lane and the mayor's office and talking about My Brother's Keeper, we've really been thinking about this theme of wellness. And today is an excellent opportunity to jump in around that theme, to talk about history, our present moment, and where we're going in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. My friends, if you would, just your name and title and how you would describe the work you do, especially to young people and young Black men in particular. Deputy Chief Lane, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. And one thing I want to say thanks to everybody for, to two brothers for being on. I think as we get to this place in not just Black History Month, but in general, it's important really to kind of talk about the space we're in and, where Black men and boys sit in this particular space. And to add on to what Josiah said, really thinking about wellness because, COVID really for me and for everybody, but I think it really underscored the form of wellness, right? Financial wellness, actual physical wellness and some of the comorbidities that folks suffer from due to their environments and the impacts of racism on them. So it really got us to thinking about, as part of an equity agenda, as part of an agenda on Black men and boys, how do we really think about, the wellness quotient and then how we start to improve the wellness quotient in these kind of like 6 core areas, and wanting to start really with framing what things kept us well in the past, what things are keeping us well in the future, present, and what things will keep us well going forward. I mean, I think we're really aware of some of the many challenges that we face, but really shifting to a asset-based model because we're being made aware in our living many of the deficit-based models all the time. So it's really how do we start to think about what are the things that we know have worked, what are the things that are working, what are things that maybe need to adjust to the time that we're going forward, and then how can we start to frame this broad kind of platform for wellness going forward.
Thank you, Chief. And could you talk a little bit about your role as not just the Deputy Chief of Staff, but the Chief Equity Officer for the city of Pittsburgh?
Sure. And so it's important to look at both of those because they're chief equity officers, and this role has become, there's a lot of chief equity officers across the country, and it's been my honor to partner with many of them in a lot of different ways. But equity, diversity, inclusion, sustainability, words can really easily become sound bites and sometimes even cliches of themselves. So one of the important roles that I play is the chief equity officer, really thinking about how do we minimize or mitigate the issues around all people in our city so that, age, race, orientation is not a stand-in for quality of life. We know right now that if you just were to say, here's a Black male, that Black male will probably live 6 to 8 years shorter than a white male of same background, same financial background, all of it, right? So we know that there is a challenge just fundamentally that's connected to race because of being in America, but also that, having that conversation needs to be at the highest levels of government. That doesn't need to sometimes just to be a conversation we're having in activist circles, or we're having in academic circles. We have to have it at the highest levels of all the work we do. So that's why looking at and trying to make sure there's a lens of thinking about equity. It has to be in all of our activities and not just in the activities that people commonly connect with equity, meaning programs, Black History Month, proclamations, and things of the sort, but actually policy and some of the things that go on behind the scenes that are also important, because by the time you see something, it's probably been through a lot of iterations. So just that connection between being deputy chief of staff and being part of the mayor's leadership cabinet, but also making sure that equity is a part, and we're thinking about it and we're using that lens in all that we do.
Thank you, Chief Lane. Excited to get into more of these intersections. Let's turn to Mr. Lewis. Thank you, sir, for your time. If you would, your name, title, and could you describe what the POISE Foundation is for folks watching?
Sure. First of all, thank both you and Chief Lane for inviting me on to participate with you today. It's quite an honor. Respect both of you and appreciate the work that both of you are doing in the city as well. So again, my name is Mark Lewis. I'm the president and CEO of the POISE Foundation. POISE Foundation is one of the I only know of 3 Black community foundations in the country. 2 are created by people that I know very well, and we're kind of mentoring them. POISE is the oldest Black community foundation in the country. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, although that took place in December of 2020. So basically, POISE Foundation, like I said, it's a community foundation, which means we're an asset organization. We create funds and manage funds on behalf of various individuals who have made donations to the foundation, some very specific, some for various charitable purposes that they determine. Some people decide to stay involved and they make recommendations where they want funds to go. So for the most part, we were created by a man named Bernie Jones, who grew up in the Hill District. Saw a lot, right? So he was there when the Hill District was thriving, as thriving can be. He was there when the Hill District was destroyed, basically, for reasons that I don't have time to get into now. But the reason it was destroyed, what it was destroyed for, let me put it that way, never really came to fruition, right? So we can talk about that if you want to get into it a little bit later. But in that process, he saw, especially for young people that had gone through some of the devastation and had little opportunity in their community, he began creating organizations. So it started as a social organization. He created Urban Youth Action, which basically the first 2 classes or groups of Urban Youth Action were cleaning up their own neighborhood. And he paid them to do that, right? To give them some self-worth in their own neighborhood. After that, as the program went along, he began to get young people jobs. And we're talking young people from 14 to really 19, jobs in corporations, when Pittsburgh used to be the 3rd largest corporate headquarters in the country. So he began to introduce them downtown, right? There was this big disconnect between the Hill and other places in downtown. And so he saw both this social need to get our young people involved in various opportunities, but along the way, he learned about this process of creating endowment funds. And what the endowment fund was really geared towards was a way where Black people could contribute to an endowment fund that we owned that would be a future asset, as Chief Lane talked about, creating an asset that would be there for our future generations. So POISE started with about $170,000. We're up to about close to 12 million now in assets. Still very small, but it's assets that we control. It's controlled through our community, and that we, as a Black organization, go back and try to figure out how can we best invest in the future of our community. And so, that's what we've been doing for 40 years. And I'll talk a little bit later about, what the future looks like as well.
Thanks, Mark. Before we move on, you guys have a special focus on the Black Family Unit. Could you talk a little bit about that and how you think about that unit and how it's changed over time? Sure.
So I think that came from a couple different things and thoughts that we had over the years. First was the idea of POISE Foundation being this tiny asset, right, in our community. We're blessed to have large foundations, R.K. Mellon, 3 billion, Heinz Endowments, about 2 billion. I can go down the line, Pittsburgh Foundation, 1.2 billion. And here we sit with, a few $1 million in assets, right? And so the thinking was, with these limited assets, how could we have a greater impact in our community? And for me, that was going back to, I'm a root cause type of person. What are the root causes that have created so many of the issues that we deal with in our community? We know the main cause is institutional and structural racism, right? But even when we look inside our community, when we think about community, when we think about institutions, the family was the first institution, right, ever created. And to us, it's the core institution. But when you look at the Black family, I'd say over the last, 50, 60 years, for example, right at the end of the 1960s, two-parent households made up about 70% of Black families. Fast forward that to today, we're at about 23% of our families are two-parent households. And we could do, 5 shows on why that's important and what that has cost for our community. But even beyond just the nuclear family, I know when I was growing up, I had a huge extended family, right? That was very close. We all pretty much lived in the same area, or at least the same city. And even beyond that, we had a strong community family. Again, fast forward this many years later, and because of jobs, because of just how migration happens, many people don't have extended family living closer. And our community structure has broken down. So that whole sense of family has really, I don't say disintegrated, but has not gone in the right direction over the last few decades. And for us, if we're trying to get back to how to become more sustainable, how to rebuild our community, it has to start with the family. And when we think about a lot of foundation dollars and a lot of nonprofits, most of those nonprofits are not necessarily thinking or focused just on the family. They're focused on individuals in the family, right? And for us, it's how do we really focus on those connections in the family? How do we create stronger family units? How do we make sure that family is sustainable, not just kids in the family or this parent? And so for us, the family is a critical focus if we're talking about how to really create opportunities, assets, and strength going forward.
Thank you, Mark. Brother Malcolm, I'd like to turn to you, sir. Thank you as well for being here and for your time. I would love for you to introduce yourself as you will, and describe for those that are watching what it is that you do and have spent your time doing so very long.
Peace. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chief Lane. Thank you, Brother Mark Lewis. Thank you, Josiah, Mr. Gilliam, for having me here, and the work that you all are doing in the community, which I learned from and am inspired by. My name is Malcolm Thomas. People in the community know me as Brother Minnekhekh, so if you hear that name, that's me too. And I have been a Pittsburgh resident all of my life. I currently reside in the Hill District, and I am the Executive Director of Reaching Back. My educational or my professional career started really with working with an organization with the Hill House, essentially. So all of my adult life, I've worked with families and worked with young people. I was the coordinator for the Young Fathers Program, one of the program coordinators there at the Hill House under Tony Bell. And in that capacity, was working essentially with young men who had not graduated from high school. So we were a GED program, and my job was to create a mentoring structure, an educational structure that helped them to deal with all of those things. So I was the first mentoring coordinator there, as well as one of the instructors. Fast forward, I went to then work with a lot of young men who were at the National Council for Urban Peace and Justice, which was called the Gang Peace Council at one point. And that led me to my introduction to working in the schools where my degree is. I have a degree in education. And so I was working in schools, and since then have worked in 19 schools in the Pittsburgh district and 22 schools overall. And so I think that's, as many as anyone I know, I've worked in a lot of different schools in a lot of different capacities. And what I began to see is that, first of all, the challenges that were being faced educationally that we're all very familiar with. But also, I began to see that, there were some other skills that were needed by young men that we were beginning to explore at the Hill House that really needed to be in place to help us to deal with the distractions, with the infrastructural things, with the soft skills, as we call them, which to me aren't really seen as anything but secondary or tertiary to most people. And so that led me to eventually, dealing with some retreats with those young men and the people there. And it was very, very powerful. And fast forward, I then went to mental health. I worked at Mercy for 10 years, at Mercy Behavioral, Mercy Health Systems, and now am the executive director of Reaching Back. What we do is we have a twofold concept. The first fold is, reaching back to retrieve the cultural ideas, what we call the ageless wisdom, which has informed best practices throughout the ages. We believe that everything that's new is not improved, and that some of the best things are things which have been lost or have been co-opted and claimed by others. So we have to retrieve our culture. We don't have to look for answers for things that we are trying to solve, because many of those things have been solved elsewhere. So we take a global and historical perspective toward problem solving, so we can begin to look at where analogous situations have occurred and where we can extract, ideas and solutions and practices and principles to begin to apply them for 21st century situations. The second fold is reaching back to our community. So we don't believe in the whole idea of we just going to get out and go be successful and come back to visit occasionally. We believe that we have to take our talents, our gifts, our skills, our expertise, whatever empowerment or privilege we're able to garner or we've been granted and blessed with, to be able to share that for the benefit of the people, in our communities, and to go back where we came from. So we believe in the principle of Sankofa, which is very basic. It's nothing new about that. But we believe that our young people are one of our greatest assets in trying to be the solution in their own communities. For most of my last 11 years, I've worked at University Preparatory School, and we wanted to make the program more robust. So we included chess because I like playing chess. I realized that a lot of our children had an anti-intellectual identity. And by teaching them chess, it was one of the fastest and most powerful ways that I could help them to counter that. So I would sit them down for 15 minutes. I can teach you this game in 15 minutes. And let's see. And by the time they learned that, they realized they could learn. They realized they could think, they could strategize, they could plan. They could begin to look at things and make decisions. And they could begin to do things that required higher level reasoning. And so what we did is implemented that in the Truth Tellers Debate and Drama program. And the sisters kind of got involved and kind of took it somewhere else. So it became a program with young men and young women. And that's what we've been doing for the past 11 years. Chief Lane has been one of the volunteers in that program, helped to shape it in its earliest stages. And I want to thank all of those who have contributed, because the program would not be what it is without the other men and adults who've contributed.
Thank you, Brother Malcolm. So, one of the things that is remarkable about your work and reaching back, and I know we've talked about this in brief, but others have communicated similar things, is that there's a significant strength in your efforts because it seems to be designed to be robust, meaningful, and enriching, regardless of the infrastructural barriers, regardless of the presence of helpful policy or lack thereof, or harmful policy rather. And I think to do that, you have to understand what it is that folks are dealing with. So I wonder how you respond to the idea of, how are the children in this current generation, and what are they facing from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, I think that, we have a whole, just a plethora of things that our young people are dealing with. And we've amassed a great deal of data, much of which points to a lot of dissatisfaction with the educational system, with the learning process. And I've heard this over and over in the past year, but I think we're at what everyone refers to as an inflection point, where I think that people are now at a point where the young people realize one thing that 2020 did for me, and a lot of people, I think, and young people I've spoken to in particular, is you realize that nothing that you really put your trust and faith in is necessarily permanent. You have this idea. There's a quote by Emerson. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. But it talks about how you have this idea that the things that are in the world are actually permanent things, when in fact they were the idea of someone at some time. And so what you realize in 2020 is a lot of what we've accepted as gospel, a lot of what we've accepted is, absolutely unchallengeable. It's in flux. Anything could change at any time. There are people I know who have not been to work since March. There's young people I know who have not set foot in a school since March. There's young people I know right now who have opted out of education because they couldn't deal with the online platform. There's people I know right now who have lost 10 people that they know due to COVID. And so what happens is I think a lot of young people are at a point where they're beginning to see that you have to begin to forge your way. You have to begin to reimagine the type of educational systems, the type of systems in general, and in fact, the type of world that you might create and want to control if you were given the authority and authorship over it. And I think that what's happening is with not just education, but with health, with investment, with finance. A lot of people lost their jobs. And so I've seen more people that are young, under the age of 20, who are involved in investing, trading, business development than I've ever seen in my life, probably times 10. I can probably name 100 people right now who are doing those things because they realize I can't necessarily count on what I thought was reliable for me on into perpetuity. So I think young people are emboldened right now to try some new things. I think they're beginning to look to things other than what they've been trained, taught, and led to look to in the past for direction, and ultimately to look to themselves.
That is encouraging.
Exactly.
What reactions do we have? Yeah, Mark, please.
Yeah, just first of all, I agree with everything Brother Malcolm said. I also just want to say, I always think that's an interesting question, to ask, what is the wellness of children? Children come into this world as sponges. In other words, they come into this world having little to no knowledge of anything. I don't know what they learn in womb, right? But when you're born, you really don't know much. And so what you learn, what you absorb is what's around you. And so I think the bigger question is, what's the wellness of our family? What's the wellness of our community? Because the wellness of our community is going to determine, in so many respects, the wellness of our children, right? And so I think it's important, and that's why for us, it's looking at work through a family lens. And again, we're not necessarily trying to just say family means, a mother, father, kids, and a household. Family has, in many aspects, a much broader context than that. But this idea of how do we look at, the community and what's happening in the community. If kids grow up in a neighborhood of poverty, that becomes their worldview because that's what they see. If they never get out, it's those kids that might live in there, but also take trips, do different things, and get exposed to different people now that have a different worldview. So we really have to look at this. And I only bring this up to say, it's extremely important that we focus on kids, but we also have to look at what's happening with the broader community. Brother Malcolm talked about people are losing their jobs, right? So if I had a somewhat stable financial situation in my household, and then that financial stability is taken away, yes, that's going to impact the kids, right? But we need to look at this from a view of what's happening from a community perspective and how are we making sure that we're building stronger communities that our kids now have the ability to absorb and thrive in those type of communities.
Thank you. Chief Lane, I'd like to ask you here, sir, because when I hear Brother Malcolm and Mr. Lewis talk about these ideas, it reminds me to a certain extent of conversations had in the mayor's office and the beginning of the Office of Equity, which is around this idea of how can you be supportive at the neighborhood, at the community, and at the family level. And sometimes we take a primary, secondary, or tertiary role, but we want to keep that in mind at all times. Could you just riff on that a little bit and how, from your perspective, the role of government and systems can do this? Because a lot of times there's inertia at play too, and sometimes these systems aren't as responsive as we'd like to see them be in real time and in overtime. So, what are your thoughts there, and how do we think about it? Muted, sir.
Thank you. So I think that the perspective of Brother Minnekhekh, as well as Brother Mark, are really instructive to think about how do we envision the things that have worked and do we apply them to this time. What I heard Brother Minnekhekh talk about was pivoting and resiliency, right? That young people have began to pivot in situations that are really challenging. And so they're challenging the systems that didn't really serve them well prior. Right. And, when I hear Mark, it's really saying, OK, we have an ecosystem here. And none of us exist outside of our ecosystem. None of us exist in silos, even if that's how funding takes place. Right. Even if that's how institutions engage the family, engage the community, it's often engaged from a siloed perspective. So there's something missing there. And so the key of a community is to be able to present and provide that North Star that then institutions can really engage appropriately, right? Like you have to say, communities have to say, people have to say, families have to say, here's the presenting challenge. What role do you play in either being helpful or harmful to the presenting challenge I have? Or what role do you play in being helpful to the solutions that are there? And I think that government traditionally in the Black community has been harmful, right? I mean, that's not, that history abounds with examples of that. I think we are now trying to turn the corner of the awareness of that unhealth of those things and trying to figure out how do you mitigate past challenges and how do you try to build on the things that are good, right? So even with the sense of amplifying this conversation, right? How do we amplify this conversation so that folks in government, that folks in institutions start to hear and start to think about what is happening in real time with pivoting and resilience, and what is happening with folks starting to invest as trillions of dollars are being made on the stock market, that now maybe for the first time, young people are seeing themselves as being a part of it. At the same time, we do understand that in this city and across the country, you still are seeing a lot of inter-community violence, right? And intra-community violence and that is still occurring because of the larger, broader legacy and the current kind of exacerbated issues that are occurring, right? So this is an example of when government listens and hears what's happening. Okay, well, if young people are being resilient, how do we start to help that? And if Mark says, okay, you can't deal with it outside of the ecosystem, okay, how do we start to think about that ecosystem and how we're touching on all parts of that? So that's just really the symbiotic relationship that should be had between community and systems, right? Community and institutions, because community is an institution and then you have other institutions. So the interplay really is the key here, and being able to listen, and then for government and to be able to use the tools presently at their disposal, sometimes create new tools, right, where it makes sense, but also to do the stuff that we can do well. I think far too often, you hear in our community, stay in your lane, right, or play your part. And I think sometimes government doesn't play its part. It starts to think that it can do things that are maybe best or more well done by others, instead of also looking at where can it really be a part of this positive ecosystem, right? And so I think that's the challenge for all of us going forward. That's for all institutions. It's saying the healthcare system, how have you exacerbated challenges? What's the role to play to be most helpful? Government, how have you done this? Schools, all philanthropy. And that's really the challenge, to really say that and use these examples to really start to augment the ecosystem, because there is a positive ecosystem. I want to go back to that asset-based perspective. There is a positive ecosystem. The conversation we're having now and the mentorship that everyone on this conversation has done is part of the positive ecosystem. The institutions everyone here represents and the legacy, whether it's Brother Bernard Jones or many of the elders that Brother Minnekhekh has built with and have informed his amazing work. We have an ecosystem. It's also about augmenting it, not about creating a new one, right? Which is about that wellness. If we know what has been done well, how do we make it relevant to this time? And how do we systematize it to the best of our ability and bring the resources in to really scale it, if you will, but not in scale, just meaning to make it bigger, but also to make it more impactful.
Yeah, I sense a golden era of opportunity in a lot of ways. I think COVID has been clarifying in many ways, and institutions, sectors, businesses, different entities are asking questions about how they can be part of positive change, stabilizing conditions, and positive change. And I've heard, conversations, you mentioned healthcare, about how folks in that sector can support college attainment and how they can incentivize that, put resources there. I've also heard them talk about how they can jump into violence prevention intervention efforts and build on the good that's taking place in that space. And I think, more examples of that in the ecosystem, so to speak, gives us a good chance at being more successful. And along those lines, Mark, I wonder if you would share with us about the Black Equity Coalition, because it sounds like this is, there's a lot of similar ideas into what went into creating this coalition and the purpose of it.
Yeah, so I'll just start with saying, one of my favorite, quotes from the Bible is, "There's nothing new under the sun," right? Which means that we always come up with all these new systems or ways of doing things, and really what changes the technology or how we do it. But the basic things of life are the basic things of life, right? And so that piece doesn't change. Regarding the coalition, so we came together as a result of the virus hitting our community, and very early on, I was one of those people that when the virus first hit, my first thought was, wow, this is going to be something where it doesn't care what race you are, who you are, what age you are. It's out there. It's just going to hit everybody. And I would say within 30 days, it took less than 30 days, we started getting statistics back. It's hitting the Black community 2, 3, 4 times as bad as it's hitting the white community. So once again, it comes down to, it doesn't matter what's happening in society, because of our history, because of the stress, because of everything else that we've been under, we always get impacted, exponentially greater than the white community for the most part. So the Black Equity Coalition was really formed from a few people asking some questions. Are we thinking about this? How are we going to deal with this? As it relates to the Black community. And so it's a group of, a few people in philanthropy, some epidemiologists, some researchers, business people, people from federally qualified health centers, people from some of the larger healthcare centers, coming together and thinking about what was taking place as a result of COVID and the impact it was having from an equity perspective, right? And so very early on, we were able to partner with Create Lab, Western Pennsylvania, a regional data center from the University of Pittsburgh, Fourth Economy, to help us gather data, right? And so we were able to, at the very early stages, almost a year ago, begin tracking, how this virus was impacting the Black community versus the white community. How many cases we were having, per our population compared to other populations. And again, we were able to see that, we were being impacted in a much greater way. So the coalition began gathering data and then offering solutions and working really behind the scenes in a lot of respects, trying to drive an equity lens, both in philanthropy, with some of the nonprofits, working with Allegheny County Health Department, working with the state health department. So we were having monthly meetings with Dr. Levine before she, got promoted to the White House, really trying to understand and inject information from an equitable perspective of how the vaccine was impacting us, how the virus is impacting us. And now we've shifted to how do we make sure the vaccine is getting to our community, right, in an equitable way. But the coalition is much greater than just this immediate health issue. The coalition is really taking a framework that is focused on the social determinants of health, looking at all of the different categories, be it health and healthcare, economic stability, education, neighborhood and built environments and social contexts, where we understand that, again, we don't live in any one particular sector or segment. All of these impact us on a daily basis. The issue in the past has been, as systems have been developed, there's not been an equitable voice at the table, or there's been intentional policies, and I won't just call it policies, right? Because policies could be neutral. It's all about who is there enacting those policies and how those policies are enacted by individuals as to whether those policies are enacted in an equitable way. So we really look at the Black Equity Coalition as a growing voice, right? It's not something that just exists of these individuals or these organizations. This is something that we are building. At the core, we believe that it's about the community, and it's about relationship, and it's about how do we create greater networks so that we all know what we're doing. The idea is not to stop anybody from doing what they're doing, but we all need to have a greater understanding of what we're doing individually and how that impacts these networks. How do what we do around economic stability impacts education, right? How do both of those impact healthcare? How does healthcare impact education? All of this is intertwined. And so our Equity Coalition is really formed around, first looking at the virus and the disease that is out there now, because that's impacting and killing our community. So how do we deal with that and make sure there's an more equitable response to that? But in the long term, even before the virus took place, we still, had disparities in just about every sector and category. How do we now bring that equity lens here in Pittsburgh, across the state, and maybe even nationally?
Thank you. Yes, and building on that idea that there's nothing new under the sun, and the reality of persistent disparities, opportunity, and achievement gaps. That's what informed in many ways our approach to My Brother's Keeper here in the city and the county. There's nothing new about the idea that there have been tremendous challenges, but is there a chance? Is there an opportunity to understand what better could be, to design better, and to implement better at the various levels? And I hear Brother Thomas talking about this idea of young people in real time pivoting and forging their own path. And so I wonder, for each of you, taking a second even to consider what counsel you would give to young Black men, or just to young people in general, or to people in general during this time. What would you encourage them to invest in terms of their own time and their own energy, in terms of their own physical, mental, or emotional practices? How can we be practical in this moment about our own development, and about how we're navigating, whether it's systems or the job market or education, what have you?
Well, I'll start. The first thing I would say is I think that we have to. I was talking with a younger brother now who's running his own organization, and one of the things he said is I wanted to invest in myself. He was offered a job, and it was a job with the school district. And instead, what he did is he started his own 501c3, which he now runs and employs 10 other people. So, investing in yourself, it could come off though as a cliche, because we say that to people. And I think that what we have to understand with our young people is that in our educational system, one of the things that you have to invest in is a real self-exploration to understand what your gifts and talents are. It's possible, unfortunately, to go to school for 12 years and still not even really know what you're good at in life. When you really understand talent, what really talent is, it's impossible to be a talentless person. Everyone has talent. And I'm not saying that as a motivational speech. I'm saying that because my only true gift that I've always had all my life, everything else I had to work like a dog for, is I could see what was great about almost anybody just by looking at them. I can look at a person and see this person doesn't realize they're so good at this and this and this and this and that. Everybody on this call, I've been around you at some moment and I'm looking at you do something. I wonder, does this brother realize how talented he is in this area, right? And I think a lot of our young people don't know their talents. And so you don't know what to invest in, where to put really your time, because you don't have an infinite amount of time. And one of the things you realize when you get to be my age is how little time you may have when you see so many pass away. Two of my closest friends passed away last year, and so you start to realize that you have to really spend your time wisely on the things that you really are good at and that you really feel passionate about. And I think one of the things that our young people have to invest in, therefore, is really trained and expert guidance and mentoring. I think we use that phrase, mentoring, but I think that I've never seen people hit the very top levels, optimal levels of their success without some level of guidance, some level of feedback and insight that they've been able to gain from people who have preceded them or have some similar experiences they can learn from. I think you cut your learning curve at least in half by being able to invest your time in people who are older. For example, one of the things you see as part of ageless wisdom in other cultures and societies is young people spend a good bit of their time with elders, not just with their peer group. There's a required amount of time, and you see this in all thriving communities, that they necessitate that their young people spend time in structured ways with people who can teach them something. Because what can happen in a conversation like this one is we can say, well, young people are going to solve the problem. The young people are the present. The young people are the future. That is true. But I believe we have to always be intergenerational in our approach to the greatest extent possible, at least with people who are progressive thinking, forward thinking, and willing to honestly assess what we need to do to move forward. So I think that we have to also invest in people who can truly help us do those things. And I think we also have to begin to truly invest in health and personal development itself. I mean, we have to have the energy, the vitality. There's a lot of things to invest in, but my specialty is what I focus my energy on is how to raise the energy and how to cultivate the personal aptitudes in the things that are most important to be able to have success in your life, the things that are not taught elsewhere. So I think we have to find out You know, and I heard Sean Parker say this, who was the first president of Facebook. He said he had to just figure out what were the most important things and how can we get good at those things. What are the most important? We call those vital skills. And my partner Joshua Colbert with the Manhood Maximizer program and Manhood the Maximizer Institute, we focus on 8 things. I don't want to go into those 8 and try to plug the program, but we believe that there are certain things that when I look at you guys, when I look at other people, there are certain basic skills that you have to have in life. You have to be able to communicate. If any of us couldn't communicate, we wouldn't be on this right now, either in verbal form, written form, and even non-verbally. You have to learn how to do that. You have to learn certain things about relating to people. That is an absolute skill you have to have in the 21st century. That's not being taught effectively oftentimes. So I believe we have to learn what are the important skills that you see top performers, top achievers, and more important, people who are challenging the status quo. And how can I get better at those things? Because I believe you have to be able to do fewer things better sometimes. Sometimes, I know for me at different times, I was a mile wide and an inch deep. I was trying to do too many things and I was going nowhere because I was trying to be everywhere. So I think we have to figure out what is our real gifts and talents. And then as Majestic alluded to, and Mark also alluded to, how can we then synergize and have a symbiotic relationship with other people who can complement those things to work toward larger projects, missions, and things which can have real long sustainable impact.
Yeah, and maybe this is to emphasize what Brother Malcolm just said. To me, it was going to be relationships. After you invest in yourself, it's the relationships, and he talked about that. I have this broad kind of like 3-category formula for success. It's education, opportunity, and execution, right? And if one of those are not present, it's extremely hard to be successful. You can have all the education in the world, you can be the best worker. If you never have an opportunity to demonstrate it, then you'll get nowhere, right? So for me, it really is investing in relationships. To Brother Malcolm's point, you save so much time. And again, if we go back to that phrase, there's nothing new under the sun, right? So if there's nothing new necessarily under the sun, then it's really about how do we do, right, what we do, and how do we do it differently? How do we do it more efficiently? We're not necessarily creating new, but we're creating things in a more efficient way. And that's where young people have probably opportunities that we didn't have 20, 30, 40 years ago. When I first started my first job, we didn't have personal computers, didn't have cell phones, right? And so, we did with what we had at that time. The critical thing about relationships, above and beyond learning from somebody about how to do something better, is learning what not to do. We probably spend more of our time as adults failing, right, than we do succeeding. And that doesn't mean don't do things. Sometimes you've got to keep going, you experiment, you explore. There are some inventors that have failed 1,000 times to get that one success. But if you could talk to somebody and they can tell you, hey, I tried this, don't go down these paths. Do you understand how much time that could save you in focusing on, like Malcolm said, those 1 or 2 things or those 1 or 2 paths to go down versus wasting your time here, because you can go down that path 1,000,000 times. It's still a dead end, right? Just because you go down a different day doesn't mean it's not going to be a dead end. So investing in key relationships that can really help you understand and guide you. And so often that means that the person that is your same age, same neighborhood, probably has the same knowledge that you have. They're not always the people that you can just look to for information because they have what you have. If you're going to move further or grow higher, you need to seek out those individuals who already are at a certain place, begin to glean their knowledge. One of the issues, especially in the Black community, is that our success is, it's not that we don't have success. In so many instances, it's almost invisible. In other words, we don't see all the successful people and people in various jobs and professionals doing different things. So it's hard to say, okay, let's just go and grab this person and have conversations, because we're spread out so far and we have so few institutions and own so few businesses that it's hard to point. And for the ones that do have those positions, they become the people that you're always, pulling on. And so, as Malcolm said, time is not infinite. There's only so many people I can talk to, or he can talk to, Brother Josiah, Brother Lane, or others can talk to. we need to figure out, how, one, to make those individuals more visible, and for us to begin to think more community minded. So if I'm having a certain level of success, I don't just run to the suburbs and enjoy that just with me and my family. I've got to figure out, how do I translate that into opportunities for others? How do I bring up that next young man? How do I just be visible so that young man can see, hey, there is, another Black successful person out there. So if I see it, then I can try to achieve it. As young people, as human beings, we learn most by modeling and what's modeled in front of us. And so, when Brother Malcolm talks about the programs he's doing in Manhood Maximizer, they are modeling what it looks like to young men, what a strong man is. And that's why it's so important for, whether fathers in the household, which is ideal or not, for them to be in that child's life, because that child is looking for, what is that model, right, that I should be looking towards to understand what it means to be a man. And so relationships to me is critical. And it's also critical to figure out who are those key people, because you can invest in bad relationships as well, right? Who should I be surrounding myself with? If I don't know somebody, don't know a lot of people, who is that one person that can recommend, hey, talk to this person, that can steer you in the right direction?
Thank you so much. Chief Lane, part of the pleasure of working for the mayor is that I have a chance to have one-on-ones with you. We talk about work and life and COVID, and we've had a lot of conversations recently along these lines. How can we approach our own health and wellness during this time? What opportunities are there to try to get stronger, to try to get better, to be intentional? And I just wonder where your mind and heart goes hearing Brother Malcolm and Brother Mark talk in this manner about how we should be investing our time in practical ways that any of us, but young people as well, can be intentional as well.
So I think for me, I want to continue on the path that they have shared. And what I think about is investing in networks. And what I mean is, there's investing in yourself, there's investing in those mentoring relationships, there's investing in those broader relationships like Mark talked about, but also investing in networks, investing in the people who want to do the things you want to do, and some folks who don't want to do the things you want to do. There's a lot of research out there about strong ties and weak ties, and the data is in that you don't receive many of the new opportunities from people you're around every day, because people you're around every day are doing the same things you're doing, like Mark said, right? That where you receive opportunities often are the folks who don't do the things you're doing every day, or folks who that maybe have access to other spaces, right? And sometimes we can have a mentality that says no new friends, right? Or I don't want to get to know anybody else, right? And what you're really saying is you want to stay exactly where you're at, right? And so I think for young people, thinking about new networks, because again, when we're talking about these new possibilities, that means you're going to have to do some things you haven't done to get where you haven't been. And so, kind of bringing it around, how do we as a family, as ecosystems, as mentors, present these networks for young people to get where they haven't gone and do what they haven't done? But it's about the love for learning and the relationship building in the broader networks that allow them to see beyond current conditions and even see beyond the deficits, to be able to see the assets that are present, not just with them, but that are present within their communities, that are present within their families, that are present within their cities, right? Because if you don't see it, someone else will come and see it. And when they come and see it, you won't like it, because they will use it to their benefit versus you using it to your benefit.
I appreciate so much the wisdom being shared right now. I have a bit of a surprise. So William, if you'll get the clip ready for us, something I'd like to show you all and then get some reactions from, especially you, Brother Minnekhekh. And
Sure.
Just by way of context, a clip we're going to show is of a young man, local man, who each of you know, who had a chance to join some very impressive leaders at the national level through the Obama Foundation and the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, including former President Barack Obama, Representative John Lewis, rest in peace, Brian Stevenson, and others. And this young man was asked if he had any final encouragements for the broadcast and for those that were watching. So I'd like to play the clip and then get some reactions.
I believe we need honesty, transparency, vulnerability, and brotherhood. And if I can just, leave you all with this, if you can internalize these words, we must give up to go up. We must give up to grow up. We must give up on the way up and give up even more to stay up. I cannot teach what I do not know. I cannot lead where I will not go. I am because we are because I am. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. I am destined for greatness because I attract what I am. And I thank you all for this opportunity.
So that's Brother Leon Ford, a very impressive young man, someone that's making an incredible impact, and it's only just the beginning, of his journey. Brother Minnekhekh, I'd like to start with you, sir. What is your heart? How does your heart react to that? And can you tell us about what you see in that clip?
Well, it's amazing because I'm meeting with Leon later, and he has been one of our mentors, and Leon has attended events and retreats of ours up in Zelienople. Despite whatever limitations he may have had physically, he was there for the weekend, and he was volunteering at the school for over 5 years on a weekly basis. So he's incredible to me, and I just say that when I see brothers like him and the young men who have that same type of spirit, young women who have that same type of spirit, it just makes me excited about where we can go and what we can do, because he in many ways is further along in so many areas than I was at his age. I wasn't thinking about certain things necessarily with the same platform and ability to make the same impact as I see him as having on even a national scale. So he's incredible to me, and I'm just pleased to be associated with him, to be quite honest with you.
He's surely a blessing, and that was an incredible moment. That was going around the world, at that time, and still has. They've shared out clips from that, repeatedly, and to hear that pledge, recited was certainly something very special. All right, my friends, we're coming up on an hour here. Certainly, there's so much more that we could talk about. Maybe we can have further conversations to do deeper dives. I'd like to open it up for a final round of encouragements, and maybe a challenge too, just that's on your heart to give to those who might be listening, to give to young people about this season that we're in. Mr. Lewis, let's start with you, sir.
Sure. Yeah. So just very quickly, I think we have to get back to this concept of community, right? To understand as a Black people, we are weak when our ties, Majestic talked about networks, when our ties to each other begin to break down, then that's when we're at our most vulnerable. We are strongest when we understand that we as a community can come together to take our assets, right, our time, talent, and treasure, to invest those to create opportunities, especially for our younger ones coming behind us. Black income in the Pittsburgh region is about $4 billion a year, right? It's not a ton of money when you think about it in the scheme of things, when you break that down by by household. But as I've talked to people, if you took 5% of that and spend it on Black companies and invest in Black nonprofits, that's $200 million a year. That's more money than federal government spends on us in this region, more than foundations spend on us, something that we can control. So we have to understand that we have the power, we have the assets. We need to come together as a community to reinvest those assets in us to create future opportunities.
Thank you, Mark. And really quickly, where can folks find more information about the POISE Foundation and the Black Equity Coalition?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
All good. Where can people find more information about the POISE Foundation and the Black Equity Coalition?
Yeah, POISE Foundation, just go to our website, www.poisefoundation.org. The Black Equity Coalition, I believe, is www.blackequitypgh.org.
All right, thank you so much. Brother Thomas, for you, final encouragements, final challenges for those lines.
Well, what I'd say is I want to go back to something that Brother Majestic said, Chief Majestic said, that I thought was important, is that, there are healthy ecosystems, and we're not starting from scratch. There's a tendency whenever you have a conversation to feel like we need to do this, but there are things that are already being done. And I think it's important to always take stock of that and be very, very, when we do our inventory of what's wrong, to focus on an asset-based perspective of what's right and what's going well. So how can we partner with that? How can we amplify that? How can we scale that? How can we do more of that at a higher level, as opposed to trying to always, kind of focus on the things about our situation that are discouraging? Because I think that one of the most important things we have to always understand is that whatever we're dealing with, we have the means to address it. Whatever's going on in the world, I perceive with the idea that we can do something about every single thing going on. And there are many people who are doing great work. I think that work needs to be highlighted, magnified, saluted, partnered with, supported. And I'm very, very excited about those types of young people, these types of older, mature, seasoned veteran brothers, and all the other people, a part of my ecosystem, who push me to try to work harder. So I'm very encouraged about where we can go and some of the things that are going on.
Thank you so much. And where can folks find more information about reaching back, about the work that you do, and just you in general?
Well, we're rebuilding our website. So I'm rebranding our website now. So that will be up by the end of next week. So I will send that to you. It will also be on Facebook, on our Facebook page, but the website's being rebuilt. We have two other pages that we have. One is theauthenticeducator.com and one is manhoodtraining.com. Those are two websites where you can find out more about our other efforts. But as far as Reaching Back's website specifically, it's being rebranded and rebuilt. So,
thank you so much. Yeah, we'll
right.
send it.
Thank you.
We'll be pleased and honored to share it out. Chief Lane, final thoughts, final encouragements, challenges.
I think, kind of going back to the beginning, that we have many of the tools that we need. Many of the things that have been talked about today, being asset-based, knowing that we don't have to start from scratch, knowing that community and the bonds of community have been the things that have been strengthening agents, even when the systems have been even more vicious towards the lives of Black people and towards the lives of brown people. That community has been often our greatest protective factor. And just acknowledging that, and then again, all institutions thinking about how can you engage individuals as well as the collective of that protective factor, because we know that all other communities know that their networks and families and relationships are the gold, are the stuff that their communities are made of. So if we know that, and we know that this ageless wisdom is about the relationships and the intergenerational relationships and propelling each other forward, how do we work with institutions to help forward that?
Mark, Majestic Minnekhekh, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time and for taking moments out of your day to share with those that are watching, but also with you personally. I'm very grateful and pleased, honored to work alongside all of you. And I would just like
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would just like to say thank you to all that have come along on the journey with us. Please be on the lookout for more broadcasts from the mayor's office, from the organizations and initiatives mentioned, the Black Equity Coalition. You can engage with them. They have weekly engagements. Bi-weekly, Mark, is it weekly?
The community engagement, I believe, is every other week at this point.
Every other week. So there's ways to get more information, to get plugged in. I encourage you to do so. And we're going to continue to explore these intersections and talk about our history, the present moment, and what the future looks like, and look for ways to encourage, highlight, and foster wellness for all of us, living here, but certainly for our Black boys and girls, men and women. So thank you all very much. Please stay very safe and very well.